The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Corporal James Hunter tightened the strap on his rucksack, his breath heavy and ragged from days in the sweltering heat of the battlefield. Around him, the sounds of distant gunfire and muted explosions punctuated the uneasy silence of the war-torn landscape. The mission was clear, but nothing about this felt simple anymore. He was near the edge of the enemy territory with a small squad tasked with gathering intelligence before slipping back into safety. Each step carried the weight of uncertainty and the haunting possibility of never seeing home again. As James moved forward, his eyes caught a sudden movement near the crumbling remains of a dilapidated building. The shadows shifted unnaturally, and his heart quickened. The war had changed many things, but the flicker of life in the darkness was something he hadn't expected. From the ruins, a figure emerged. It was a dog, a German shepherd, her coat dirty matted, but her eyes sharp and full of intelligence. She seemed as wary of him as he was of her, but beneath the caution there was a desperate need for help. James could feel it like a silent plea carried on the wind. He signaled to his squad to hold back and cautiously approached the animal. Her ribs were visible beneath the grime, her movements stiff and pained, but she held her ground as if daring him to come closer. Something about her presence reminded James of the bond he had once shared with his own dog back home, a connection unspoken and unbreakable. He reached out slowly, and to his surprise, she didn't flee. Instead, she let out a low growl, then a soft whimper, as if deciding that maybe this stranger wasn't a threat. The mission was urgent, but James knew he couldn't leave her behind. The war had already taken so much, and in that moment the choice was clear. This dog was not just a stray, she was a survivor like him, and maybe together they could find a way out. The squad was restless but trusted James's instincts. They prepared to move out quickly, their path filled with danger at every turn. As they navigated the ruins, the enemy patrols grew closer, their shouts sharp and unforgiving, echo as James had begun to call her, stayed close by his side, her ears alert and muscles tense. They moved swiftly through the debris, weaving between crumbled walls and broken vehicles, every step a gamble. The sun was almost gone now, casting long, dark shadows that seemed to reach for them from every corner. The team was silent except for the crunch of gravel underfoot and the steady pounding of James's heart. Suddenly the ground trembled beneath them, a deafening roar splitting the air. The explosion came. Without warning, sending a cloud of dust and debris skyward, James was thrown to the ground, the world spinning violently as pain shot through his leg. He struggled to his feet, heart pounding, desperate to find echo in the chaos. But she was gone, vanished, into the smoke and confusion. The squad was ordered to retreat, but James refused to leave without her. His mind raced as he scanned the ruined street, every instinct screaming that Echo was still alive, but trapped somewhere nearby. The silence after. The blast was almost worse than the noise, the absence of movement pressing down on him like a weight. He called her name, voice hoarse and cracking, but only the echo of his own desperation answered. Back hours passed in agonizing silence until a faint whimper reached his ears. Through the smoke and shadows he spotted her trapped beneath a fallen beam, her leg caught and eyes wide with pain and fear. James's breath caught in his throat. Adrenaline surged as he crawled toward her, careful not to cause further injury. With every ounce of strength he lifted the heavy wood and gently freed her. Echo whimpered again, nuzzling his hand in gratitude. But the danger was far from over. They were stranded alone deep behind enemy lines with night falling fast. The air grew colder, and every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. The distant cries of soldiers and the occasional flash of gunfire reminded them that time was running out. James knew they had to move fast to survive. The bond between man and dog had never felt stronger in those desperate moments, as they began their cautious journey back. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with unseen threats and hidden dangers. Echo stayed close, her body pressed against James as if sensing his resolve. They shared a silent promise to protect each other, no matter what came next. But just as hope began to flicker, a sudden shadow darted across their path, a chilling reminder that the enemy was never far behind. The hunt was not over, and the true test of their courage was only just beginning. The bright lights of the city were a stark contrast to the dust and rubble that had defined James Hunter's world for so long. The familiar hum of cars and chatter of people felt almost foreign, yet comforting after months of war. He stood outside the hospital where his wounds were being treated, the sterile smell and cold walls a reminder of how far he had come, but also how far he still needed to go. Echo, the German shepherd, sat loyally. By his side, her eyes watching every move as if she understood the battles that still raged inside him. James had been discharged from the military, but the transition to civilian life was proving harder than he had imagined. Every noise startled him, every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The memories of that night behind enemy lines haunted him. The explosion, the frantic search, and the bond he had formed with Echo. A bond that had saved them both, yet now felt like a fragile lifeline in a world that no longer made sense. Echo was more than just a companion. She was a guardian watching over James with a vigilance that was almost supernatural. At night, her ears would twitch at the slightest sound, and her body would stiffen if she sensed danger approaching. But it was not just the scars of war that troubled James. It was the strange occurrences that began to unfold in the quiet town they had returned to. One evening, as James sat on the porch, his thoughts drifting to the past, Echo suddenly jumped to her feet, her hackles raised and a low growl rumbling deep in her throat. She raced toward the edge of the yard and stopped staring into the darkness beyond the trees. James followed her gaze, but saw nothing, just as he was about to call her back. A sharp crack echoed through the night, followed by the distant sound of footsteps retreating. The incident was dismissed as nothing more than a prank or a passerby, but James could feel the tension tightening around them. The town, that once seemed so peaceful, was now cloaked in an unsettling silence punctuated by shadows that moved where no one should be. Echo was not the only one sensing the threat. Strange disappearances had been reported, neighbors who vanished without a trace and whispers of a shadowy figure watching from the woods. James knew something sinister was unfolding, and Echo was his only clue to unraveling the mystery. One night, Echo disappeared without warning, leaving James frantic and desperate. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and yet here she was gone as if pulled away by an unseen force. James tore through the streets calling her name, voice raw and cracking. The fear clawed at his chest. The thought of losing her again was unbearable. His search led him to the edge of the forest where the trees loomed like silent sentinels under the moonlight. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. As he ventured deeper, Echo's faint barking echoed through the shadows, guiding him forward, until he stumbled upon a hidden clearing bathed in an eerie glow. There in the center stood a group of figures, their faces obscured by hoods and masks, their voices low and urgent as they spoke, in a language James could not understand, but the message was clear. These were no ordinary townsfolk. They were part of something dark and dangerous, the kind of secret that could unravel everything. James's heart pounded as Echo emerged from behind a tree, her body tense but defiant. She had found him, but the danger was far from over. Before James could react, the figures turned their attention to them. A tense standoff ensued, the air thick with threat and uncertainty. Echo growled fiercely, lunging forward to protect James, but the leader raised a hand, signaling restraint. Their eyes glinted with a mixture of challenge and warning. James realized that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would test every ounce of courage and trust he had left. The figures vanished into the night, leaving behind only a chilling promise that their watch was far from over. James held Echo close, feeling the weight of the unseen war pressing down on them both. The quiet town was a facade hiding a darkness that threatened to consume them. Unless they could uncover the truth, and fast, determined to protect the life they were slowly rebuilding, James vowed to follow Echo's instincts no matter where they led, even if it meant facing enemies, both human and something far more terrifying. Echo was no longer just a rescue. She was a guardian, and together they would stand against the shadows, ready to fight for their future and each other. The small town that James thought was a safe haven suddenly revealed a hidden undercurrent of secrets and danger. With Echo by his side, James found himself drawn into a clandestine network of veterans and animals trained for purposes far beyond companionship. The discovery was as shocking as it was vital. This was no ordinary group, but a covert operation blending the loyalty of man and dog into a formidable force against threats that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. James was introduced to the crew in a dimly lit basement where the air was thick with anticipation and unspoken stories. Each member carried their own scars, both visible and invisible, and each animal had a past marked by resilience and survival. Echo was not alone in her silent vigilance. The dogs and their handlers worked in unison, forming bonds forged in adversity and purpose. Their mission was to protect and to serve in ways conventional forces could not. The days turned into weeks as James trained alongside the crew, learning to communicate and coordinate in ways that challenged his understanding of loyalty and trust. Echo proved to be a natural leader among the animals, her instincts sharp and unwavering. She was a beacon of strength in the face of the unseen dangers that stalked the town. The crew shared stories of their battles both abroad and at home, revealing a web of conspiracies that threatened to tear apart the fragile peace they had fought so hard to achieve. But as they delved deeper, the stakes grew. Hire, a trusted ally, revealed information about a betrayal from within the crew itself. Someone with intimate knowledge was feeding secrets to an unknown enemy, putting every member at risk. The revelation shattered the fragile trust that held them together, casting suspicion on everyone and turning allies into potential threats. James and Echo found themselves on edge, constantly watching and waiting for the next move. The lines between friend and foe blurred, leaving a dangerous void where paranoia thrived. The mission was no longer just about protecting the town, but surviving the invisible war that raged within. Their every step was shadowed by uncertainty and the weight of choices that could mean life or death. A midnight rendezvous led them to an abandoned warehouse where whispers of the conspiracy grew louder. Echo's keen senses picked up the faintest sound of movement, and James's heart raced as figures emerged from the shadows. The confrontation was tense, a battle of wills and wills alone with no clear victor, but the encounter left behind a crucial clue pointing to a powerful adversary pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The danger was escalating and the crew was fractured, but James knew retreat was not an option. Echo's unwavering loyalty gave him strength to push forward to fight, not just for survival, but for redemption and justice. Yet just as they prepared to strike a decisive blow, the ground shifted beneath them, a betrayal so profound. It threatened to unravel everything and leave them vulnerable to a final devastating attack. The storm was rolling in dark clouds, gathering like an omen over the small town James Hunter stood with. Echo by his side, the tension in the air almost. Tangible lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the faces of the crew, their eyes hardened with determination and fear. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the culmination of every secret, every betrayal, and every battle fought. In shadows, their enemy was no longer just an abstract threat, but a tangible force, ready to strike. Echo's fur bristled as the first drops of rain fell. The dogs and their handlers moved in synchronized silence, their training evident in every calculated step. James could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He was no longer just a Marine or a man with a rescued dog. He was a guardian, a leader standing on the precipice of a war that could change everything. The mastermind behind the conspiracy was revealed to be someone close, someone whose betrayal cut deeper than any bullet. Their motivations were complex, tangled in greed, power, and revenge. This adversary had manipulated the shadows, turning friends against each other and sowing chaos in hopes of seizing control. The crew's trust had been weaponized, and James knew that the only way to win was to confront this enemy head-on. The battle unfolded under the fury of the storm. Echo darted through the rain-soaked streets, her agility and instincts unmatched, as she led the crew toward the enemy's stronghold. James followed closely, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. The chaos of the fight was a blur of flashing lights and clashing wills, but in the eye of the storm was the unbreakable bond between man and dog, a force that no betrayal or darkness could sever. Just when victory seemed within their grasp, a sudden explosion rocked the ground, sending shockwaves through the crew. The mastermind had one last desperate move, a trap that threatened to engulf them all in flames and ruin. James found himself separated from the others, trapped and wounded, the world spinning around him. Echo's frantic barking was a lifeline pulling him back. From the edge of despair, as the smoke cleared, James crawled toward Echo, her eyes shining with fierce determination. Together they faced the final moments of the battle with nothing but trust and courage between them. The truth about loyalty, sacrifice, and the cost of guardianship became painfully clear in the storm's aftermath. The enemy was defeated, but the scars left behind were a reminder that peace was fragile and the fight never truly over. In the quiet dawn that followed, James looked out over the town, a place forever changed by the night's events. Echo rested beside him, their bond stronger than ever, forged in fire and trust. They had become more than rescuer, and rescued more than Marine and dog. They were guardians united by a promise to protect and to fight for the light, no matter how dark the shadows grew. The dawn was breaking slowly, washing the sky with pale shades of pink and gold. But James Hunter felt no peace in his chest. The battle was over, the enemy defeated. Yet the silence that settled over the town was heavy-weighted with loss and uncertainty. Echo lay close by, her breathing steady, but James knew this moment was just a fragile pause in an endless war that had already changed them both forever. Small crew that had gathered around them was tired, battered but unbroken. Each face told a story of sacrifice, of nights spent in fear and days driven by hope. Their mission had been more than survival. It was a fight for something greater, a promise, to protect the innocent and to stand against the darkness that crept into every corner of their lives. Yet as they looked at each other, there was no celebration. Only a sober understanding that the road ahead was long and uncertain. James reached down to run his hand through Echo's thick fur, feeling the familiar warmth and strength that had pulled him through the darkest moments of his life. She lifted her head and met his gaze, a silent conversation passing between them. Without words, they acknowledged the bond that had grown between them, a connection deeper than any chain, deeper than fear or pain. It was a bond built on trust, courage, and an unyielding will to protect each other, no matter the cost. But the war was not just around them. It was inside them. James felt the weight of memories, the faces of friends lost in battle, the haunting images that sometimes stole his sleep. Yet Echo was his anchor, grounding him in the present, pulling him back whenever the shadows threatened to consume him. The dog's eyes held a quiet strength that reminded James that even in the darkest times there was hope. There was a reason to keep fighting. As the crew began to disperse back into their lives, James knew that things would never be the same. The town had scars that ran deeper than the surface wounds, and the invisible battles would continue long after the guns fell silent. Echo would remain by his side, a guardian watching over him as he tried to rebuild a life that was fractured, but not broken. Together, they were a living testament to resilience and redemption. The following days brought unexpected visitors, veterans who had heard whispers of the crew and their mission. Men and women with their own stories of pain and survival, seeking a place where they could belong, where they could fight for something that mattered. Echo greeted each newcomer with a wag of her tail and a cautious but hopeful look in her eyes. It was clear that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, a community built on loyalty, strength, and shared purpose. James found himself once again at the heart of a movement larger than himself, one that transcended war zones and battle scars. It was about healing, about finding family in the most unlikely places, and about never giving up. Even as the past threatened to pull him under, he found new strength in the faces around him and in the unwavering gaze of Echo-late. One evening, James sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. Echo curled. At his feet, her breath slow and steady. The quiet of the night was a balm to his restless mind. Yet even in that peace, there was a flicker of anticipation, a sense that their journey was far from over. Somewhere in the distance, the first light of a new day promised challenges and victories, yet to come. James reached down to scratch behind Echo's ears, a smile breaking through the weariness in his eyes. Together they had faced the worst and come out stronger. They had transformed from rescuer and rescued to guardian and protector, bound by a loyalty that could not be broken. This was their story, a testament to the power of courage, friendship, and the enduring hope that even in the darkest times there is a light worth fighting for. And, as the night deepened, James whispered softly to Echo, "I am ready for whatever comes next." With a gentle nudge, Echo pressed her head against his hand, as if to say, "Me too." And in that moment, under the vast expanse of stars, two warriors stood united, ready to face the future, whatever it might hold.